Hi, I'm Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thank you to all of those who support us. And if you enjoy this episode, please consider making a monthly donation on our Patreon. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcast. Father Bonaventure, welcome back to another episode.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back.
Yeah,
of course.
It's been a while. I feel like it's been
That's
a
right.
while since we've been together on this. So.
Yes, I think that's true. And we do when we have the three friars things for the Lexios, for instance. We seem like we see each other more often. But we do. We don't do as many as we ought to do maybe together, as far as I can tell. But maybe we do, and you just don't know. It all mixes in.
I don't know.
I'm delighted to be back, though.
Yeah, and this is. Is this your first full academic year teaching?
It is. That's right. Yeah,
okay, so we got
finish the first
year.
Yeah, exactly.
In the books.
Yep.
And thoughts. Quick hitters. Give me two.
I'm gonna love it. You know,
Okay.
I love.
Good.
It's nice to do something you love.
Yeah.
And, I love teaching, and I get to teach honors freshmen. So they get the bright and chipper students, and that's great.
You get to extinguish that flame that they come in with.
Stoke it.
Yeah.
Fire it.
Okay.
So I bring that to full froth, if we switch the metaphor to boiling things.
Yeah, there it is.
But no, stoke that flame, and then I teach a philosophy of art class to juniors, and that's the elective where they have to take a CUA, philosophy elective, on top of their normal 2 philosophy core courses, if they're not in honors. And I explained on the first day that you might be in here because you looked at the schedule and you said, well, I've got to take a philosophy.
Right.
Let's see, philosophy of religion. No, not going to do that. Philosophy of God, not going to do that. Philosophy of language, no idea what that would be. Philosophy of art. I like looking at art.
Yeah.
And I said, so if you think this is like an art appreciation course, you were sadly mistaken. We're not going to be doing art here. There'll be no paint. We were not even going to be really looking at art. We don't care about that.
No.
We care about, we're not be judging whether art's good or bad. Nope. This is an ontology course. This is a metaphysics of art. We're looking at what the essence, what the concept of art is. So if you like math, this is good for you.
Okay.
So, and I did this the first year, and one student decided that she was there for something else maybe, and then 4 others joined. So who knew that metaphysics of art was actually a desirable thing?
Yeah.
But it's a delightful pairing of teaching some juniors and seniors, the upperclassmen, and some religious, and then also the freshmen, their very first class at CUA. I teach that, and then get them into the Aristotle and philosophy through the year in ethics, politics, and logic.
That's awesome. I just keep thinking if there was a lab portion to your art philosophy of art, it should be just a bunch of like turkey drawings of hands.
That's
and things
it.
like
Start
that.
there and get going.
There you got to start somewhere. But getting the students looped into Aristotle and moving through the kind of the whole kind of spectrum of philosophy, especially from the early end, the freshmen and things like that. You're going to cover everything, right? That's part of the philosophical.
Got to cover. I mean, everything in nothing in depth and everything in breadth.
Yes, exactly. So that's a great line. Yeah. And that's kind of motivating this episode a little bit, and a little bit from my experience working with college students as well. I have noticed there's been a rise in interest in philosophy, which is great. You love that.
I think there's more leisure time
Yep.
today and such. So this is the good part, the chiaroscuro world of AI and computers, and this is we have more leisure time to think and read and all this. We don't have to milk cows every single day and plow the fields, but we can actually just set the computers to do our things, and then we got to figure out what to do. And some people choose the life of the mind for that. That's great. So I can see that.
And I think one of the things that I've seen is because of that interest of, maybe there's a set of guiding principles that I should live my life to. Maybe there's something foundational.
12 rules or something.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. Maybe there's something foundational through which that gives me direction, framework, something through which I can engage with the rest of my life. Yeah. And one of the things that I have seen, there's been this kind of renaissance or increased interest in the Stoics.
Yes.
And I'm seeing this particularly with like frat bros and finance bros, some athletes, like the quick quips from the Stoics of years past. Like there's something that is really attractive to that demographic that they're like, the Stoics, I want to like really, there's whole Instagram accounts and things that are just based on the Stoics.
Yes.
And it's really popular.
Yes, I remember this a couple years ago when I was actually here with you and we were student brothers, and the Stoicism was becoming a philosophy of life. There were books by Stoic philosophers, historians of philosophy, and philosophers who taught about Stoicism, then putting it forth as actually a philosophy of life.
Right.
Because you might teach certain philosophies and not think of them as philosophies of lives.
But
this one proposing like the good life according to Stoicism, I remember picking this book and thinking, wow. And it's true, people do seem to glom onto this. Stoicism is coming back in a sense. It always does come back.
Yeah.
It's a bit like
it's a little perennial,
a bit like Athens and Sparta for the West and for us are just perennial sources of inspiration. And generally Athens is kind of the reasonable one. But then, of course, I mean, with 300 came, remember that a couple years ago?
I remember when that
Sparta,
came out.
There's a sense that, Sparta always has this pull to us and this sort of, military hunker down kind of thing, especially for men.
Do you remember that whole it may still be there, the Tough Mudder and the Spartan races, where a group of accountants, the accounting team of whatever firm would be like, we're going to do a Spartan race for team bonding. They had that attraction to it.
In a sense, Exodus 9, these kind of there's always the sense of excellence in physical discipline and such. And that's very much the Spartans have very much of the Stoics relate to the Spartans in the sense that they're cutting both from the same cloth of this kind of very disciplined, martial, but reasonable system. And of course, Stoicism is a bigger system than that. But Spartans have this tie into that. So it's a perennial, I don't want to say temptation because there's much good in it, but it's a perennial experience that people will go back to these fonts, whether it be from Aristotle and virtue ethics, or Epicureans with the kind of pleasure sense, or Stoics with the sense of virtue and reason. Yeah.
So let's go dive into the Stoics then. All right. So when we say the Stoics, who are we talking about, and what are the individuals that are kind of epitomize that title?
Yeah, so the Stoics initially, of course, they get their name from where they do their philosophy, where they stoicize. You could say, so at the Stoa was a particular porch in Greece. So a lot of the original schools were just gathered around a man. So the Academy with Plato, and then the Lyceum with Aristotle. And they have students gathering around, and they're really places. And the Stoa was a particular porch or patio or something in Greece, and Zeno is the first kind of Stoic, you could say, post-Aristotelian, but very close, very close. And then he has a number of followers who inherit the school. Probably the most famous is Chrysippus, who is an excellent logician. So Stoics have this threefold sense of philosophy. That there's logic, ethics, and physics. And they were excellent at all of these things, but their logic, particularly Stoic logic, is a little different than Aristotelian logic, and it's much more like modern logic than Aristotle's logic is. So that sort of thing. So Chrysippus is one of the founders of you could say even modern logic. But then we often know the Stoics not from their Greek versions, so from the BC time period, 300s and such, but from their Roman version, of course. Because the Romans, of course, pick up this martial stuff. They pick up some of the Stoics, and we know them through, largely Cicero, so De Officiis would be popular. Seneca is also downstream of that. But of course, Epictetus might be the most approachable. He was a former slave and wrote a little handbook, and I have it here. It's very, very easy, very light, called the Enchiridion. And it's by Epictetus, which is a great name for a child because it has dental fricatives in the middle. They're T's. And so
because that's what every parent is thinking about when they name their child.
It's very, but it's very approachable. If you want to know Stoics, Epictetus is excellent on this. And then, of course, the most famous you could say is Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations from 161 to 181. When he reigned, he writes these sort of Stoic meditations downstream of Epictetus and Cicero.
So on the historical side of things, just to make sure that we're clear. On the Greek side of things, we're placing the Stoics after Aristotle.
It's exactly. So you have Socrates, Plato, the Academy, Aristotle, Lyceum, and then you call the Hellenistic period, which is just post-Aristotle. And you have the schools of the Epicureans, and then you have the school of the Stoics. And there's other ones there, but they're the main players just after. So we don't say not too far, but they're all responding to Aristotle and others, but they're their own Greek schools.
And then the Romans kind of pick this up a little later chronologically, but right.
Very similar to, I mean, they're bringing the Roman sense to it, so it's in the big difference is they're writing in Latin. And Cicero, of course, many people, Tully, read him as the Latin classic. So Thomas Aquinas is very much influenced by De Officiis, and this is just a classic text.
So as we understand, okay, now we know who we're talking about, but you mentioned these three big categories that the Stoics are just like experts in. Can you break those down? Let's like see why and how that they focused on those three.
Yeah, and before even analyzing, we might as well synthesize initially in that for them, I say there are three things of philosophy, which is based on the logos and reason. But actually, for the Stoics, interesting enough, they're three sides of a same triangular coin. So logic and physics and reason, reason in a sense breaks into three parts. Yeah. Logic, which is the purely formal matter, and then two material matters, one to deal with physics in the material world, you could say, the things that happen by determinate causes. And then this other one is ethics, and that's to deal with humans and reason. So you can think of it like matter and reason, humans and reason, and then reason on reason.
Right.
So the Stoic system is intertwined, doesn't have the kind of dualisms that we might be familiar with today about theoretical and practical philosophy, reason sort of thing. Yeah. It actually is very it's united in that they're all forms and different sides, you could say, of just reason, the logos. They believe very, very, very strongly in the rationality of the world, such that everything makes sense. That means that in logic, your job is to know how reason works, to coordinate and agree yourself with reason, qua reason, your thinking process to get it right logically. They're very tight about that. But then the two other ones, the physics and the ethics, those are actually a combination such that you, as a human, meet the physical world, and that's governed by reason, and you ought to be governed by reason. Yes. And so your job is to get into agreement and harmony with the reason that is in the world of the causes and you in your will. Yeah. So it's a unification there. And then the ethical project is, in a sense, to live in agreement with nature. Yep. Not in the sense of like plants and cannabis and all of this, but nature qua rationality.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that like why this continues to come back to being like, oh, this is a form of life. It helps you to understand existence, reality, that there's an ordering to this that I can engage with, I can understand, I can be a part of, right? So it helps us to understand the reality that we are a part of. Yes. It gives a certain kind of engagement and understanding of that there is order to it of itself. Yes. And I need to investigate that. And like you said, so importantly, to be in harmony with that. But at the same time, it's like, this is also not just like the pure investigative side of like, I need to understand it. But this entire thing is ultimately aimed at the flourishing of the person. Yeah,
as I bring myself into obedience with reason, I will find myself, in a sense, flourishing more. Although we'll have to nuance that. Yeah, that's more that's an Aristotelian way of saying this, right? And they don't have the same kind of business. But I think there are perennially, with rational beings, if we're anyone who's intelligent and reflective, this is a human trait, that you have a tension between knowing that stuff should make sense and yet stuff not always making sense. So in the most basic forms. And any philosophy that's worth its salt is going to have some way of grasping both the fact that things seem to make sense in some way, and yet at the same time, there are parts that don't make sense, and trying to make sense of the senseless with this. And Stoicism, I think why it's perennially popular is because it does give you a way of understanding the senselessness while not making everything senseless. So it's a matter of reconciling the tension of reason and unreason. And that's so any philosophy that can get at that fundamental tension to the human person will be able to be successful in propagating over and over and keep returning, because we again find in our experience that stuff should make more sense than it does. Yeah. Maybe that's the fundamental experience, that stuff should make more sense than it does. And you've got to have an account, or you want to have an account, that will explain both why it should make sense and why it doesn't always make sense.
And I think out of those three areas, and the kind of push to understand and give
reconcile.
a frame, reconcile, live in harmony with that, the thing that probably is the most both accessible and attractive to most people are the teachings, the understandings with respect to persons dealing with persons, the ethics side of it all, right?
Yep.
Like that's going to be out of those. That's going to be the one that kind of captivates and gives you the most clarity or insight on that.
And that's what people are probably caring about anyway.
Right.
Very few people are interested in Stoic. Many people are interested in Stoic logic because but that's just logic now because it's so good.
Yeah.
And very few people are interested in Stoic physics. But Stoic ethics is something that when someone says I'm interested in Stoicism, they mean it's ethics. So maybe that's good. It's a good point to turn to that, I suppose.
And that's people's first encounter with it. And it can open
Marcus
up to
Aurelius is generally doing ethical principles.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then that's where the quotations and things are kind of short and quippy and things like that and grabs your attention, but it's mostly the ethical side of things where persons are dealing with persons. So in that understanding, but let's talk a little bit about like in our terminology when we talked about kind of the flourishing side of it, but like with what is happiness with respect to that? Because we talked about like this is a framework, a way of living that is ordered towards flourishing, which is not necessarily that terminology, but it encapsulates that, which means it wants people to be happy.
Yes, that's true, exactly. And it's happiness. Aristotle starts the Nicomachean Ethics with the sense that everyone. We're looking for some universal good. Right. Everyone says that's happiness, but what they don't say is they don't all agree what it means. Okay, and that's good, but everyone agrees that you ought to be happy. With Stoicism, I would say first off, it's not so much happiness in the Aristotelian sense, but rather peace of mind is the key. Okay. So it's a sort of stability, which is for them happiness consists not in so much as activity, which would be in more Aristotelian sense of flourishing and acting, in the way that we think of God as being happy because he's pure act and all of this. But the Stoics have much more a sense of passivity, that happiness lies with becoming peaceful with other things acting. Okay. So if I can the first line of Epictetus, the handbook, gets us nice, and I think it's a nice quip for everybody. It says, "Some things are up to us, and some are not up to us. Our opinions are up to us, and our impulses, desires, aversions, in short, whatever is our doing. Our bodies are not up to us, nor our possessions, our reputations, our public offices, or that is, whatever is not our own doing. The things that are up to us are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded. The things that are not up to us are weak, enslaved, hindered, and not our own." And so all of a sudden you have this binary set that says the things that are up to me are really the mental products, like my mental life, how I interpret, take, respond to things mentally. What's not up to me is anything that has to do with physical matter. Now that's not just the stars and the sun and such, but actually it's like what happens to my body. So it's a sense in which while I said there wasn't the dualism that you might find in other things, there is a stark sense as well, because I think dualism is, again, a perennial issue that we have to, as West, deal with, that you are not the sole arbiter and agent of all in the world. Rather, for the Stoic, your job is to harmonize yourself and accept the fate of the universe and even your own fate. You have control over your mental properties, you could say, your desires, what you think, what you kind of want in some way, even that though is a little bit influenced, and then how you interpret things. But what happens to you, your daily life even, the situations in your life around the world, everything from politics to tsunamis to natural disasters, you have no say over that. And one of the Stoics' points, one of the important parts of the Stoics is to kind of like draw yourself, get a hold of yourself, and remember, don't confuse the things that are not up to you as being up to you, because then you will find them frustrated and you will lose peace of mind. Peace of mind is saying, I have a basket of things that are not up to me, and I have nothing to do with those, and so I just get rid of them. And I have a bunch of things that are up to me. And when they're up to me, they are totally up to me. So, for instance, if there's a great tragedy, like I lose a child or someone else loses a child, or something happens, I sustain a great injury, I lose a job or something, none of that stuff is up to me. The thing that's up to me is whether I choose to accept it or reject it. And the only reason I would do that is because either I wanted to be peaceful or not peaceful. So you have this, which I think is why it's so attractive, especially today, is when things feel out of control, when things in our lives seem to be just fate or it's too big for us politically or whatever, the Stoic says, don't worry. Yeah. Here is a way to still be happy amidst your inability to deal with things. Yeah. So it's not as much happiness in the sense of Aristotelian flourishing, but rather happiness in a sort of resignation and a peace of mind to that. Because, according to a Stoic, so many things are just not up to us.
And I think I see two things, and maybe we'll get into this a little later, but that whole concept of, okay, the things that are up to me are entirely up to me.
Yeah,
you know?
That's right.
So how does that not quickly devolve into like relativism?
Well, in a sense, relativism means that I get to choose what counts in the external stuff.
Okay,
right?
So
you could have relativism is like an external, everything's up to me, right? In terms of I can decide whatever I want. Whereas a Stoic you could say, is the antithesis of relativism.
Okay, that's
because
awesome,
literally nothing is up to you in the externals. You don't get to decide what you're this or this or this. The only thing that's up to you is whether you are happy with what is not up to you.
Right.
Whether you choose to accept it as something good or bad. In some ways, there's an immense freedom in Stoicism because what's up to you floats free of everything physical. Yeah. So literally nothing for a Stoic, right, could make you unhappy except you. Aristotle knows this thought, and he rejects it fundamentally.
Really? Okay.
Because for Aristotle, he thinks if anyone says that you can be happy while suffering, they're insane. He just thinks it's unintelligible because Aristotle thinks that you can't really be happy and flourishing unless you have some kind of material for flourishing, whether it's your own life and control, whether it's external goods. Like you have to have something has to be going well outside of you.
Yeah.
All right. You can't just wall off and say no matter what's happening outside of me, whether I'm burnt or being stabbed or I've lost my entire family or everything's on fire, the Stoic says there is still possibility. And actually the only thing that's keeping you from being happy in this situation is you. Whereas for Aristotle, that's nuts. The thing that's keeping you from being happy is the fact that you aren't flourishing. Your arms are being ripped off and your house is on fire. And no one can be happy when that's occurring. But for a Stoic, because you have this way of stepping back from all the physical, that's the physics, it's not the ethics. And they're not, even though related in the reasonable section, they're not related on the physical because the ethics is not the physics.
No.
So you have this big divide in that. So that's a massive divide between Aristotelian accounts and the Stoic account. But you can see why today, when you have also the sense of dominant, regnant materialism, right?
You're right.
So in Aristotle's time, you don't worry about determinism so much, whereas today, just recently, Spolowski, a professor, produced a book on there's no free will and all of this is standard stuff. Everything's determined. Everything's determined according to laws of nature. Blah blah blah. And the Stoic has an ability to say, sure, whatever,
sure,
I'll give it all to you. I can be as scientific as possible. I can. I don't have to go weak in the knees and say, well, there's some things that aren't determined. No, I can say everything is fully determined. And that doesn't bother me because that's the physics.
Right.
My own internal attitudes. Now you might say, well, what about those? But they've got this, stark divide between them. I float free of that.
Yeah.
I can choose no matter what is happening to myself outside. I can still be happy in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the difference between Stoics and Aristotelian thought.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a lot more to actually really uncover. But you mentioned Epicurean earlier, and that's the other kind of prevailing tension with the Stoics. So can you make some differentiations there with that?
It's good to situate with their audience, I suppose. With Aristotle's man in the mean. The man in the middle.
Yeah.
And in some ways that's a shame because there's some things that you shouldn't be in the middle about. But Aristotle is he's always in the middle, almost always in the middle. Occasionally, and he says no murder, no divorce, no murder, no adultery, and no thievery. He's got absolute prohibitions that it's unclear why he should have those because he shouldn't be entitled to them. But that's a side point. The key point is that Aristotle, you could think of him as standing between the Aristotle account of virtue, which Thomas picks up, of course. He stands between these two post-Hellenic, these two Hellenic responses, post-Aristotelian schools. One, of course, Stoics, where it's reason is in a sense the governor of the good life, and the emotions and the passions and the physical doesn't matter.
Yeah,
doesn't matter.
They happen, but they don't matter.
The only reason they matter is because you make them matter.
Yep,
you know?
exactly.
Whereas on the other side, you have the Epicureans, which is the kind of hedonist school, where pleasure kind of, and you can make this a crude version of just kind of sense pleasure, or you can make it a more refined version of like a rational pleasure in a way.
Yep.
But the Epicureans have the sense that, that pleasure is what drives it. And so your reason is downstream of that. You see this again in, say, Hume and the empiricists. This is a very kind of physical notion. Utilitarianism has this kind of sense. The British love this kind of thing. Whereas you could say the Stoics head out to Germany. The Stoics are the Germans pick up on this. The British, they like matter and the empiricism and all of this and the senses. So they pick up on that. So they're more, they think the Stoics are also nuts because Stoics are even worse than Aristotle.
Yeah.
Because for an Epicurean, all you have is sensible pleasures. Aristotle, it's reason related to the pleasures. That's what virtue is about, is drawing the pleasures up into reason and conforming them. Stoics, just reason, really pleasures aren't that important. And the Epicureans, the Stoics are the worst in the world because they deny the only thing that actually matters.
Right.
It's not like halfway with Aristotle. So, and hedonism is, of course, pleasure principle is something that's always attractive because pleasure is attractive given our sensible natures. Yeah. But the Stoicism one shows up, and I think the reason why Stoicism shows up more often and more commonly is because it's so starkly contrasting to our general thing.
Yep.
And you've got to take, as a Stoic, you kind of man up a bit, you could say, and you have there's a sort of like harsh truth and facts don't have feelings, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it stands out a little. Epicureanism, everyone kind of likes pleasure anyway, whereas like freedom from all pleasures, that requires you to give an explanation or at least an excitement. So Aristotle's between these two.
It's funny because like even though Stoics are about like, okay, you have absolute control over the interior aspects of things, but the physics and the things that are outside of your control are totally outside of your control. Yeah. I think and once again, getting back to some of the things that we talked about at the very beginning is like, okay, well, why is this like becoming more and more attractive right now? Why is it getting more traction? Yeah. I think that, there is this extreme emphasis in the Epicurean school of the senses and the hedonist experience and
push against you go one side, you swing to the other.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fair.
But the emphasis on Stoics are like almost presenting a little bit of a facade with the Stoics is like, okay, we're going to go from the utter dependency on the pleasures, and now we're going to have total utter control over yourself. Like, and it's like, well, it's not Aristotle, just like the full control. Like I'm going to assert my utter control over all these things. Like there is that understanding that there's a lot that's outside of your control within the Stoics, but people become really dissatisfied and kind of exhausted with a hedonist thing, and the Stoics present this completely opposite experience. And it seems like those Stoics are like just the uber disciplined, controlled freaks that it's like what I don't have in the hedonist life. Yep. So I'm going to pursue that with all I have and go from one side to the other, one extreme to the other. You
could think that it's both. Both of them have a sense of letting myself go. The hedonist is like, let yourself go there. And then the Stoics is like, just let yourself go.
Yeah.
Just let all of it go. You focus on the interior peace. I think there are the dangers of the Stoicism, of course, is a sense of fatalism. It kind of slides into that. Well, if nothing is, how much that part that's up to me gets smaller and smaller,
right?
And so, like, is anything up to me? I mean, even my desires, my thoughts, and all of that. Like, how do you bankroll that? And it is exhausting to realize and always like force yourself to believe certain things, you could say, against the senses. So disconnect between the senses and such. This is, of course, I'm sure there's a Stoic person. Well, you're making a easy target. Fine, just making big, broad brushstrokes here.
Right. Yeah. This is a 30-minute episode. Yeah, we're trying to do a lot here.
So I'll say that the dangers are a fatalism, and it just doesn't have especially from the Catholic perspective, the Christian perspective, your bodies matter.
They do.
So they're created good, and they have this relation. So we want to be attentive to that. Jesus brings a lot of wine to a wedding. Not instead of when they say we're out of wine, he says you could be happy no matter what, whether poor or rich, doesn't matter. But then again, the motifs of Stoicism are helpful and taken up in Christianity largely through St. Paul, although Jesus, of course, Paul talks about, you'll often hear kind of Stoic refrains. I can be happy in much, in less, in shipwrecks, what have you. He has this sort of sense of whatever's happening physically to me, I can still find happiness. But it's from a different perspective, I would say, in that it's not rooted in some sort of deep kind of fatalism that says, whatever, it's not but that the producer of the external, in a sense, the physiker, is God, who loves him. And so he's happy regardless of his situations, not because he can do nothing about it, it's just the nature of things, but because it's a nature and that's a providence, and therefore he's happy because he knows that the Lord will not tempt him beyond he can endure, this kind of thing. So it's although on the surface many people say, oh, well, Paul's got this Stoic influence on this. Yes, but he's just like Aristotle takes up the passions by reason. Paul has taken up the Stoic insight, which is good, that you can be happy even in suffering, margin all of this, but he has retooled it in a providential, personal relationship. The Stoics, logos is logos. Whereas for Paul, logos has a face.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. And there's a certain kind of redemption in that where, like, maybe some of the Stoic understandings and things are taken up by Paul, but they are never outside that relationship that he has with Jesus.
Yeah, like, it has to be.
It's always allowing Christ, who is the light himself, to illuminate that in those ways. And with that kind of understanding, like, as we kind of wrap things up, like, there's always going to be, with these kind of perennial things, whether they're, pre-Christian, post-Christian, or things like that, there's going to be some truths in the midst of it, some pros and cons and stuff like that. What would you say would be this renewed interest of maybe some of our listeners who are like, they find these Instagram accounts, a daily Marcus Aurelius or whatever it is, and they're like, yes, this resonates with me. Like, what are the goods there that is like, yes, this is a
I mean,
pro.
I think really is the sense of that we need not worry about what we're to wear the next day, how we'll be clothed, what food, we need not worry about the things that we have no control. There are some things we have no control over. We need not worry about those things. So the sense of not being anxious, but going for a peace of mind is sort of but that peace of mind is the mind of Christ. I mean, so that he is, in a sense, he is a Stoic in the best sense, that he's the person who is not bothered by the storm around him, on the water. He's not bothered by the crowds. He has control of his emotions, and he knows his Father's will, and that's what we are to embrace. So the pros are that we need not be worried about what will happen to us tomorrow. That there's a sense in which we are protected and we have control of what matters is our love. It's really, that's what matters, regardless of the situation, is what we do with our heart and how we see a situation in the light of Christ. But that's specifically it. It's the peace of Christ which surpasses all understanding and knowledge, not the peace of mind because of a deterministic and fatalistic account of physics. So I'd say if you find with Stoicists, you find people who are interested in Stoicism, as with many things, you say, right on. But let's go. Let me introduce you to the very best of the Stoic philosophers,
Jesus
Christ. The Logos himself.
Right. And what's the biggest risk, you think?
Yeah, I think the biggest risk is to deny the relationship to the passions, to feel that nothing really matters in my life, and that I'm just a quietist and I'm resigned, and that happiness and joy are entirely something up to my own mindset. It's a denial of I think it's a denial of human nature, fundamentally,
absolutely.
And the fact that God says this. He created all things good, and that Christ multiplies wine at a wedding because he wants people to not just be happy in a state of mind, but to feel happy in their bodies and their flesh.
Awesome. So let's all pursue the great Stoic, Jesus Christ, the one who was able to integrate the Logos and his passions and all that it is by taking on our own humanity in the incarnation. So we're going to end it with that. Jesus is Lord. So thank you to all of our listeners. We really appreciate it. And you can follow us on all the social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, X, Google+. Is that still a thing? I don't think so. Anyway, Instagram. And we really enjoy the engagements there. So please follow us on those platforms, like, comment, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you are listening to this podcast. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, please do so through our Patreon and follow the link in the description or the show notes of this episode. Also, in that link in the show notes or description, you can find information about upcoming Godsplaining events, one of which is our upcoming men's retreat, which will be in North Carolina, Brevard, North Carolina, this upcoming August. So that'll be for men that are in a certain age range. I think it's like, I don't know what it is, 21 to 35, 40, something like that. The information's on the website. Check it out there. I do know Father Bonaventure and Father Patrick will be leading that retreat, so they're excited about it.
Maybe we should do Stoicism. Real Stoicism.
Real Stoicism.
Because it's for men's,
a men's retreat. Okay.
We'll see.
Possible theme for the retreat. Stay tuned and check out those information. You can also follow the link to our website for Godsplaining merchandise and to get more information about anything else that we are doing. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.
Father Gregory.
'Tis I.
How many goldfish did you have growing up?
I think like 3. One mostly at state fairs. They didn't last too long, and I flushed them.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Godsplaining.